Thank you, Monica, and thank you, everybody. I'm excited to be presenting with you today, and I'm really excited to share this presentation with you. Browser DevTools, the other tool for APEX development. So what if I told you that you've had this powerful tool all along? If you've been using APEX, you've been using this tool, you've had it, and you probably, some of you already know, but some of you, hopefully we can get you introduced. So my name is Jorge, I work for INSOM, and you can get a hold of me here on Twitter, and of course, insom.ca it's our company. And the only quick thing I'm going to mention is that next Thursday, we are starting a series of short presentations called the INSOM Insider. And hopefully you can join us then. So that's all I'm going to say about that. All right. So what's our objective today? Let me see if I'm going to get rid of this bar here. There you go. So what's our objective? My objective would be to help you with your APEX development. I really want to improve your troubleshooting ability and up your ability to create applications with APEX. And I'm going to show you why. So where is this tool we're talking about? Well, it's really everywhere. Every browser you use today will have it. Chrome, Edge, even Internet Explorer, Firefox, Opera, Safari, and even other browsers that we may not be listed here. There's really so many other browsers. As I was researching for this, there's many variations of browsers, and they all have some version of this DevTools. So how do we get to it? Well, every time we do a right click and we inspect, we're actually getting to those DevTools. Many tools, they also have an F12. So if I go here to a regular page designer in APEX, and it doesn't have to be APEX really, if I press F12, I get this bottom section that opens up, right? Or if I right click and I select inspect, I can get to this browser tools that has multiple elements, and we'll get more into that. In fact, this presentation, which I'll share the link on Twitter right after we're done, it's also a browser presentation. It's a web presentation. So I can open the browser right here by doing that, and I can get to the console and other elements. And I'm going to close this to continue, okay? There's also some short keys. If you want to go straight to the console, you can do Control-Shift-J or Command-Option-J in the Mac. If you want to go straight into the, just open the DevTools, it doesn't matter what type it is, you can use an I. So many ways to get to that. And then once you're there, you can manipulate a lot of CSS values. I'm going to show that in a second. You can also move between the attributes with the tab key or shift tab to move back. So you can move between the attributes with the tab key. So let's look at that. Let me, for example, inspect. If I do right click on an element and I select inspect, this HTML represents that it gets, the element I right clicked on gets selected automatically. And then right here are my CSS attributes. And if I click on one of them, if I click the tab key, I jump to the next one and then the next one. And you can see, look at my selection right here on the right. And let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys. And I'm doing shift tab and I'm moving back. What if I wanted to change that pixel? So if I do the up arrow, I'm incrementing the values. I'm just hitting my up arrow. And you can see how this border top width is incrementing. And apologies to Shakib for defacing the builder here for a moment while I demo these features. So you can see how I can go really large. And here's the default color, but what if I go with something really garish, like a red? So now, oops, let me get rid of that. And what happened is I kind of killed the D there as I was typing, right? So there, I moved it, I made it a red. But look at what happens when I hover over the elements, they kind of get highlighted so that you know what element you're looking at. Now, I didn't really make this change permanent. If I refresh my page, it goes back to the way it was, all right? Now, I still have that header selected. What if I wanted a different color? Well, I could type a hex value, but there's also some nice tricks here. Like, for example, if I click on that little color selector, it opens a picker where I could go to a different color, right? Now, let's refresh that. Now, another thing I love to do is the Shift key. Press the Shift key when you're looking at a color, and this works in Chrome. And it rotates between representations of the same color, the RGB, the HSL, and the hex value. All of these are exactly the same color, just different representations. And now all I'm doing is pressing the Shift key and clicking. Now, I like HSL to find complementary colors. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. So if I wanted this same color, but lighter, I'm gonna click on that 24. And now, again, I'm just gonna use the up arrow. And look at what's happening to that color. It's going lighter and lighter and lighter every time, all the way until it makes it to a white. But by going just a little bit, you can find really interesting complementary colors to an existing color, okay? And then when you tab out of it, it goes back to hex, and then you can place that color in your applications. Back to that. Exploring, there's lots of things we can do. So as I show you, you can inspect and you start looking at the HTML, and then you can start typing elements and start modifying things. One thing I like about Chrome, let me go to an application. I just have a standard report here. I'm going to inspect a row, and I have this row selected, right? I could make changes here. Tab, and you can see how that changes right there. Now, if I refresh the page, that goes away. Now, as I'm selecting things, I can make changes to that row with this element style changes. This is a handy way for me to inject attributes just for that row. All I do is click there, and now I can do different things, like, for example, background, and you can see how it gives me a list of things that start with the word background. I want the background color. And let's make it yellow for highlight. So now I can start prototyping how something may look. Maybe I want to change the font. I'm going to do font weight first, which is like the boldness. So I'm going to bold that. And I can do font size and make it like 2EM. EM is a value that is in proportion to the default font size. So 2 is 2 times the regular size. So that's an easy way to make something super big, and you can see how it can get really ridiculous, right? But as I'm making these things, look at what happened to the HTML. Those attributes are being applied right there, and that allows me to play with different attributes and see what's going to happen with them. By the way, you don't have to go in whole numbers with the EM. I could do 1.5 or 1.8, right? So you can fine tune what you want. So that's an easy way to select something and modify how it looks. That way you modify the inline styles. How about classes? Look at this little selector. This little button in Chrome allows you to specify classes right there for a row. So let me refresh this again. I'm going to select this TR and I'm going to click the class. And I had previously created a class called highlight on this page. So as I type highlight and I tab out of it, and I should have selected a different row. Let me show you this row. So I click on this button, I type highlight, and look at what happens. It gets highlighted yellow. And I hit enter, and there's my class. And I can add other things. For example, an isActive. Now, isActive doesn't modify this one, but it shows that I can add different classes, and I can click to turn them on and off and see what the effect of the class is going to do on my elements. Now, why didn't it work for the very first row? Well, it turns out that there's this rule here. Let's add the highlight again. Highlight. So there's this rule right here that it's more specific than mine and sets it to white when we're alternating rows. So this is sort of the frustration with CSS, right? Some of the rules that apply. But I'm going to turn it off. I can temporarily turn it off, and then you can see how my yellow is being applied. Okay, so that was with this button. It allows me to, when you click on it, you can add and turn off and turn on classes, so you can prototype and see the effect of having that class present. Pseudo classes. So you've noticed what happens when you hover over things. Sometimes something special happens, or the focus. Well, it turns out that those are called, the hover, the focus are called pseudo classes. So let's do an example. Let's go over here. I have this application in which when I hover over let me refresh the page. When I hover over the elements, it's kind of subtle, but you see how they get a little shadow and the rows kind of move a little, right? Well, let's inspect that. That's done on hover, right? So to prototype that, I have the element, this OJ element selected. I'm going to click on this HOV, and these are my pseudo elements, and I can turn on the hover. So I don't need to have my mouse on top of it. Look, I just hit on that, and you can see how it's going on and off, right? As I click on it. So now that it's on, here's my rule, and I can now play with that. And maybe I want a much stronger shadow. I'm going to make this a 5. You see how that shadow gets a lot darker? Heck, let's make it almost black. So now I can play with how the shadows are going to look. And look, I can still hover over the other ones, but this one is sticky in terms of the hover selected. And there's other states like which one is on focus. You can see focus, the default on universal theme is to give it this blue outline when something is focused with the keyboard. And we can see that when we navigate between elements. So if we wanted to modify the focus while it's visible, we can select that, and then we can find there's a default focus rule that we could modify. So I could create a new focus rule and see how it's going to look. I'll turn those off. There's a special element called $0. Let me tell you what that's about. If I inspect something, so I right click, I inspect, and I have, I'm going to select the LI element, okay? I have this LI element selected. If I go to the console, let me clear this. This is a nice, useful thing to clear the contents. If I type $0, look how that row is highlighted blue. $0 is the last element you selected within the elements. So let me go to the elements again and click on something different. Body, this region body. So now if I do $0, that is the region body, okay? What I like about $0 is it's a quick handle to a specific element, and it allows me to quickly prototype stuff I'm going to use on a dynamic action. So for example, in this example, and if you guys attended some of the previous sessions, you may have seen that sometimes you want to get the value from another element, from another HTML element or a cell. So if I'm on this element, or let's say I'm clicking, right? I'm clicking on my row, and I want to get this data ID. Well, I'm going to prototype that by doing $0. So that's that link. And I'm going to turn it into a jQuery. And then I'm going to do parents li. So that gives me the list. Let me show you that. See, I hover, I can see how the full list is selected. And then maybe I want the data element call ID. So that's a 1 for the one I selected. What I'm talking about, this 1. Let's do it for the 4. I'm going to click right there. And I'm going to run the same thing. So that gives me the 4 because that $0 is the element I am selecting. So this is going to be useful because in a dynamic action, the element that triggered the dynamic action is called this triggering element. So you can prototype with a $0 and then replace it with this triggering element inside your dynamic action. And I have more information about that on a blog post where I kind of walk you through an actual step of prototyping with a dynamic action. Hopefully that'll be something useful you can start using right away. I love that $0. There's some built-in JavaScript functions available to Apex. V for value is one of the most common. We can have V and the name of an item. So for example, P30ID. So let me go to a page with an element. So this is page 110. So this, if I inspect this element, I can see that it's called department number, dep number, right? I'm going to select it. So if I go to my console and I type $V and the value, I can get the value that element has. Of course, that right there is empty, but if I switch it to accounting and I do that again, it's a 10. If I switch it to sales and I do $V again, it's a 30. Now, just like I have the V for value, that is actually a long form to this actual JavaScript call, apex.item, the name of the item, and get value. So if I were to do the same thing here, doing apex.item, that it's a selector to my item, and it has a lot of useful functions, one of them being the get value. So that would be the equivalent to getting the value. As you can see, as a lazy developer, I love doing $V. Very quick and easy. Now, that's what we're going to call the long form. Now, just like there's a V, you can imagine there's an S to set values. So let's set the department to value of 10. So before I hit enter, watch what's going to happen here. This is going to jump and my report is going to update. And if I switch it back to 30, I can set it. So you can set values with the $S. And you guessed it, there's a long form that is a set value and you set it to the new value. You'll often use when you're setting values inside your dynamic actions. And if your item is hidden, then you may need to change the value predicted to no. But if you do that, hopefully you've seen the security session from Scott Spinellini. There's lots of things you got to be aware of when you do that. Just make sure you're not opening yourself to danger. $X is to get a reference to the actual DOM element. What does that mean? The actual, so let me go back to this one. And if I change it to an X, now I get the HTML element. That is like a pointer to the HTML element. And if I click on it, it's almost like it's live right there. And I can right click and select reveal in elements panel. And it jumps to the element to the location where it's at. But that $X is something you could use within your JavaScript code to get a handle on elements. The long form equivalent would be to get the node of that element. All right. And Monica, let me know if there's any appropriate questions right now that we should address. I'm okay addressing some of them right now as well.
Okay. We don't have questions at the moment.
Great. All right, network. Let's talk about what happens with the network. So, of course, we are working with a web browser with our application, and APEX is in the database. Our web browser will have the CSS, JavaScript, and images. Now, this being sort of an architecture, we're going to call the web browser the client side and the database our server side. And when we do communication between them without refreshing the page, that's when we are doing AJAX calls. And if you watch any of the other sessions, you've heard this a lot, right? Now, on the browser, we have the JavaScript world, and on the database, we have our SQL and PL SQL world. Now, on the DevTools, there's a network tab that will show us all the activity related to the network. So let me go back to this page. Let me switch to this network tab. Let me clear this. If I were to refresh my page, look at all the elements that came through. All of these things were the calls with this to the CSS and JavaScript that is required to render this page. It all started with the page call, but once the page was called, all these other things were loaded. And if I click on any of those elements, I can see the information about that call. I can even preview the data of those elements that are being downloaded. For example, this is like a JSON call that defines our languages. If you do translated applications, you would be familiar with some of these values, which are the values that arrive translated for our application. So lots of interesting things get downloaded here. Now, I can inspect what's going back and forth when we do AJAX calls. Let me clear this out. If you remember, this page will, when I switch my department, it refreshes the report. Operations has no values, research has those, sales has those. And every time I'm doing those, I'm getting this AJAX calls. Now, let's ignore that collector for a moment, because that's something in the environment. I'm gonna filter only the AJAX calls. When I click on those, the preview shows me the actual report that got downloaded. And on headers, let me make this bigger. There's lots of information in the headers. But the one that we usually care about is the form data. The form data tells me the application number, the page, our session, the debug parameter, our request value. And this one is the interesting one where P110 department number is being submitted back to the database so that the query can be executed with a department number of 30 and return with my report. If I look at the response, I get the raw HTML. Preview would kind of give me the representation. If I look at my previous calls, you can see what was coming back between them. So I often will use this to validate that what I'm sending is the right information and that what I'm receiving back is what I expect. This is a fabulous troubleshooting tool. There's lots of options to modify here, and I invite you to kind of play with them. These are filters. So let me remove that query, right? And you can see here how that filter got turned off. But I can see I only want the AJAX calls. I only want the JavaScript calls. Let me refresh the page. Only the JavaScript, only the CSS, only the images, and so on. So lots of interesting things here. Now, if there's problems getting some objects, you would get some of these will be red, and this status will have some different values. Like a 400 would mean it wasn't found. If you're still using older versions of APEX like 4.2 and 5.0, I am so sorry. But that request, that form data will look a little bit different. It used to have value pairs of argument names and values. But starting with 5.1, we get that JSON information that I was just showing, which the benefit is that this JSON doesn't have a practical limit. It's really a very large object, so we could submit hundreds of items there. Not that I recommend it, but this eliminated some problems that existed with the older versions where we could only have 100 page items on a page. We could only have 100 items on a page. Yeah. All right. So we did a little demo of those. Some interesting miscellaneous features. Preserve log. So on Chrome, the feature is called preserve log. On Firefox, it's called persist log, but they're really the same thing. So you've noticed that here, if I refresh the page, this gets cleared and loads again. But I guess that didn't do that well because I had preserve log turned on. Let me refresh again. So it clears and loads. And if I refresh again, it clears and loads. Okay. Now, if I do this preserve log feature, the log will remain. If I reload the page, now look at what happens. Now I have, this is the original call. And somewhere down here, here's the next call. And if I do another one, it would get accumulated. This is invaluable for those errors that occur before you submit the page. Maybe you need to see what got submitted. So now I can inspect some of those calls and catch some possible problems. So preserve log or persist log, as Firefox calls it, is super powerful. There's also an equivalent to preserve the console values. Let me show you that. So if I'm here in the console, you click on this console settings, and here it is, preserve log. So now whatever's being logged here will remain in the page. So let me give you an example. Let's edit this page. This page has a dynamic action that says that when my department changes, I'm going to refresh the page. Now, what if instead of refreshing, I was submitting the page? So I'm going to say submit. I'm going to submit the page. I don't want it on initialization. I'm actually going to, I can leave the refresh there. We're just going to get like an extra effect. But I'm going to submit the page. And before that, imagine I have some JavaScript that is executing. And maybe that JavaScript has some errors. But in this case, I'm just going to use this console.log. Console.log. Hello. Okay. So what's going to happen? I'm going to print hello. I'm going to submit the page so that it loads again. The refresh will happen and we'll see it, but then the page will load. We can ignore the refresh. All right. So I have the preserve log turned on. Let me close this. Let's force the reload and look at what happened. So here's my hello, and it remained there even though the page reloaded, right? So you could see errors or messages before they get clear because the page loads again, or before you navigate away to another page. That's where this is really valuable. Maybe this jumps to another page and now you lost the errors that you're trying to catch on the originating page. So you could see that message. So what would happen if I turn this off? I do it again. You see the hello kind of flash. I don't know if you can see it, depending on your network speed. You'll see it down here. Hello, and it goes away, right? So that would be very frustrating if you're trying to catch an error or a message and then it goes away. That's why I love knowing that my preserve log is there. Okay. And Firefox calls it persist logs. When you're selecting the console, it's a lot easier to find, right? In Firefox, you click on console and you'll have it right there on the right side. Whereas in in Chrome, you have to click the gear to find it.
Jorge, there's a question.
Yeah.
When you look at the JSON data in the AJAX call, there's a clause that reads protected. What does it mean?
Let me see. Oh, let's turn off my two elements there. I'm not sure if I know what we're talking about. So let's let's clear the preserve log. Let's clear this. Let's refresh. Okay. So here's the AJAX call. And you're saying there, it says protected somewhere? Oh, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Down here, right? Protected. Right. That's a great question. So this is how APEX is protecting the values that are being submitted. This is a hash value, and this is also a value that both values play together to avoid tampering, so that you're not sending the value you shouldn't be sending. So these two values will validate that the values you're sending and the item you're sending is what is expected. So it gets calculated on this page, those get calculated, and then they get validated on the receiving end. And we don't have to worry about it on our code. This is something that the APEX tool framework does for us. Okay, so it's a checksum to make sure there's no tampering with those values. Good question. Anything else? Okay,
no,
we'll continue.
not at the moment.
Let's switch gears a little bit. So ever need to take a screenshot of your page, but your page is too long, right? Well, there's something called the command palette now in Chrome. So let's go to a long page like this one, okay? So this is a long page, a beautiful page, and I may need a screenshot of the whole thing. So I'm gonna open the inspector. I'm gonna go to the console. I may not actually need to be in the console, but I'm gonna clear that. I'm gonna type Shift Command P, and that opens this command palette. And I'm gonna type screenshot. Now look at that. I have these fabulous options where I can screenshot an area, full size, which is what I'm talking about, or just a regular screenshot. I'm gonna do full size. If I select that, I'll wait a moment, it's rendering, it's capturing, and I'm not touching the keyboard or anything, and then it downloads. Here's my download now. And I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna click on it to open it. And there it is. Here's my long image with the full page as an image. Isn't that great? Now, this command palette, if I go back here, if you're on Windows, Control-Shift-P. If you're on a Mac, Command-Shift-P. It's very similar to what Sublime Text, the editor, and VS Code, the editor, are doing with the command palette. Lots of powerful things. If you notice, there's lots of options here, and some of them are simply to jump around. So with keystrokes, I can do that and show network, and then I jump on the network. Command-Shift-P, and I can do show elements, and I jump to the elements. So lots of really cool navigation here. All these panels are jumping around, and then there's lots of other things that you can explore. Way too many for us to cover, and some that I really don't understand what they do yet. Very powerful. If you are using Firefox, it turns out it's way easier to do. There's going to be this 3 dots on your toolbar, and when you select it, it's going to say take a screenshot, and then you can select options. Is it the whole thing or just a section? So very easy to do. I show you how with the panels you can jump around. Let's talk about the console log, right? Our debugging friend tool. So we can do a simple console log of a message, and it doesn't matter if I'm on this not being an Apex page, right? It doesn't matter where you're at. If you type console.log and I type hello, it prints out the hello, right? Now, what if I have a variable, and I'm going to do variable I equals to 2444, okay? So if I do console log of I, it prints that value. But what if I'm looking at a lot of values? I'm like, what was that? What variable was that? Well, you may start doing something like this, right? I, and concatenate it with I, and you print it out, right? Oops. I should do JavaScript concatenation. Thank you. Not PL/SQL, right? But there's a better way. For simple variables, instead of just printing the I, wrap it in curly brackets. That kind of turns it into an object. And look how it prints. It prints I and the value. I kind of like doing that for simple variables that when I'm troubleshooting something. I find it super simple, right? Brackets, and it does the object. It won't work if your I is a complex object already, or a JSON structure, or a jQuery element, but it will work perfectly for strings, booleans, and numbers. So instead of not knowing what that 273 is, you wrap it, and it's easier to look at. So wrap your variables in that. This is for debugging only, right? Not for final code. Now, console log there's no just a log. You can do info, debug, warn, error. Now, some of these will actually look different. Let me copy this. And you know what? Let's do it right here. I'm going to paste it. Now, look at what it does. It actually prints in red. It actually prints like an error. The warning is yellow with a warning message. So this will give different flavors of what you're doing. Info kind of looks pretty much the same like the regular console log. Now let's talk about this one, table. I kind of like this one. This is really good for printing some array data, if you will. So let me see, where do I have a little? So I'm going to do it right here again. I'm going to clear this. I'm going to define a variable, kind of like a JSON structure. And if I do console.log of something kind of complicated, it prints like this. And now the development tools are pretty powerful. I can expand it and keep on looking at the values. That's really good. But if it was really long, that can get kind of tedious. You could do table. And it will format it like a table of sorts. So I find that pretty cool feature. So for example, if I am, let me go back to, sorry about that. Let me go back here. If I had an interactive grid, so this page has an interactive grid, never mind the ugly data there, but it turns out that when the interactive grid first loads, it has this IG variable, GIG, right? So GIG, and there it is. So here's the load data for my interactive grid, and here's the values, right? So this is kind of hard to look at, the values. But I could do console log table, and that value, that variable, dot values. And now I get a table of that information. And what's really fascinating, it's actually kind of like a live table. I mean, you can sort it. Is that crazy? So lots of features there. Oop. I lost my presentation now. That's all I have to here. As you can see, this is, I think to me, this is an introduction to all the features that are behind your development tools and how much you can really do. I hope this scratches the surface and gives you, gets you motivated to use it a lot more. And please remember to fill out your evaluations.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jorge. It was very useful, this presentation. And I forget to mention that your t-shirt is pretty cool.
My what?
Your t-shirt.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's Apex. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go with the questions.
Yeah, sure.
Can we call this palette from Apex page to get a print of a full page?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of, it's agnostic to the version of Apex. So it really doesn't matter, sorry, what you're looking at. It really doesn't matter if it's, so here's an actual longer, I'm going to go /UT just to cheat. This is an Apex application. I'm going to go to, I don't know if that's long enough. Let's see. But yes, absolutely you can. I just want to go to one that's, maybe this is long enough, right? This is perfect. It doesn't fit. I got to scroll to see it. So I'm going to open my console. I'm going to do Command-Shift-P, screenshot, and select the capture full size screenshot. It looked kind of weird for a moment. It's just doing it for bigger resolution. And then it's going to download. There it is. It's downloading. I'm going to save it. I'm going to open it so we can see it. There it is. So it really doesn't matter if it's Apex or not. It's just taking whatever the browser is rendering and presenting the whole thing. Super powerful.
Okay, perfect. Do you know if these useful tips works exactly the same way in every browser, or is different if you are using Mozilla or Google Chrome or Internet Explorer?
I've mainly used Google Chrome here because it has some nicer features in my mind for working with CSS and JavaScript. That said, Firefox is incredibly close, and so is Edge, Microsoft Edge. All those are almost on par with their features. And nowadays, almost everything I show is going to be available, just as you saw, slightly different name changes on some of the features, but almost everything I showed is going to be available on all of them. I think the console table is mostly a Chrome feature. I don't know if it's available in Firefox yet, but they're always topping each other. So yeah, I'm going to go with yes. Just about everything is available on all of them.
Okay. It depends of the version of Apex, I guess.
Nothing. Nothing I show you here is dependent on the version of Apex.
Okay. Excellent presentation, Jorge. Thanks. I watched a lot of online Apex presentations, but I think this is not a question, just a comment.
Okay.
There's another question. Sometimes I see red mark beside Home tab on the developer toolbar option. How to
Yes.
inspect? How to inspect
Yeah.
the
So
tool?
yeah. So let's go to an application here. And if I understand, you see a red mark here on the side of the toolbar, right? That is a great new feature that started with Apex 18 something. I want to say maybe something like that. And it tells you that there's an error in the console. That's your cue to open your inspector, look at the console, and look at the errors. So let me see if I can kind of try to do a super quick example here. I'm gonna edit this one. I'm gonna add this. I'm gonna add some JavaScript. I'm gonna say invalid code, right? That is clearly not JavaScript. And guess what? It's gonna fire initialization, so it's gonna fail right away. I'm gonna run the page, and sure enough, I have my indicator there. But you don't know what it is until you open the console, and then there's the error, right? It tells me it's not the most readable in this case, right? But I know that it's happening when my dynamic action is initializing. So I can tell now that it's something with dynamic action. And what I recommend always, open the console and generate the error again with the console open. So I'm gonna reload again. That usually, not in this case, there it is, syntax error, unexpected identifier. I'm gonna click on that link. That will jump to where the code is, and look at that, I can almost see it, right? It jumps to the actual place of the error, but that works if you generate the error with the console open. And then you can probably recognize where that code is or go search, fix it. Next question.
Okay. Can you invoke the full size screenshot from a JavaScript?
I don't think so. I don't know if that feature is available. I don't know for sure. I'm gonna say no.
All right. I think that is it. Do
Great.
you want to share anything else?
No, when I share this slides, there'll be some links to some interesting things. Google always is giving some great information about the DevTools and all the power that they have. Just a quick reminder, the Insider next week. And this was Browser DevTools, the other tool for Apex development. My name is Jorge, and you can find me on Twitter at Rimblas. Follow me, and I'm going to tweet a link to these slides right away.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's another question about
Of course.
EM, but I don't really know what it does mean. Susan is asking about EM.
Oh, yeah, the EM. So I had used the EM as size instead of pixels. So let's see. So here, for example, I have font size 12 pixels for that line. So PX would be your unit of measure for, you can see how this is getting really big, right? Well, EM, it's a proportional size that basically means it's twice the base size that was specified for the page, 2 times the size. So it's nice for responsiveness. Sometimes you want to use pixels. Sometimes it's nice to specify things in EMs. It's just another unit of measure. There's actually a lot of units of measures. We can probably talk a lot about that.